We require to just understand arrested hypertension, and let us see what exactly we have. And the website is very easy. DRSARMAJI, Dr. Sharma ji. Dr. Sharma ji. My student has started, so it is G is also added. JIG. So I'll again type it out somewhere there. Okay. So then, so essential hypertension, uncontrolled hypertension, pseudo-hypertension, resistant hypertension, refractory hypertension, secondary hypertension, renovascular hypertension, malignant hypertension. These are some of the key words. What commonly we see is called the the essential hypertension is something which is we very commonly see. So which is also called the primary hypertension, where you don't have a definite etiology and is multifactorial one. And around 95% or 90% of people are essential hypertension. Uncontrolled hypertension means patient is either not taking drugs properly or on suboptimal doses of the treatment. Non-compliance may be the reason. Pseudo-hypertension, also called white coat hypertension, patient will have...
Sir, here these slides are not moving. Now it's okay.
They will move. Once I move only, they will move.
Okay.
Now they will move.
Okay.
Okay. So pseudo-hypertension or resistant pseudo-hypertension is the white coat hypertension, where you have patients will be having hypertension in the clinic and at home they are normal. And resistant hypertension is what we are going to look at. Refractory means whatever you do, the hypertension is not under control. Secondary is due to some secondary cause, either renal or endocrine or vascular, whatever may be the reason. And renovascular is a special entity of secondary hypertension. Malignant hypertension is a very fast progressing disease with papilledema and then cerebral encephalopathy and malignant kidney disease and all that. So let us go ahead and look at it. It's important that BP measurements are revisited once again. Sitting and standing recording and contralateral arm may be required. 2 readings 5 minutes apart are essential. Rarely the lower limb blood pressure also may be required. After resting, preferably in the same time of the day, better you take the blood pressure almost on the same time of the day, because there is what is called a diurnal variation of blood pressure. And the disappearance of the sounds should be taken as diastolic. And standard cuff size also very important, 12 by 26 centimeters. Larger cuffs are available, smaller also available. If the person is very obese, you need to use a 13 size or 14 size, and standard is 12 size. Calibration of the instrument from time to time is essential. Cuff should encircle at least 80% of the arm and on a very thin clothing. Quiet environment, relaxed doctor, very difficult to find. A quiet environment and also a relaxed doctor. And of course, a relaxed patient is also a myth. Anyway, that is what is the textbook says. No smoking, alcohol or caffeine by the patient just a few hours before the recording. Oscillatory gap, remember that. And what is that oscillatory gap? All of you know. Recollect the cortical phases, and phase 4 only when you have the diastolic sounds heard till 0. Sometimes you'll be hearing the diastolic sounds till 0. Then what you take as the diastolic pressure is the muffling or not the absence, which is the phase 4. So everyone knows that for 40/90 for a non-diabetic individual is the upper normal limit, and if it is the diabetic or CKD, the target blood pressure is 130/80. So 130/80 for diabetics and CKDs, and 140/90. JNC 7 only I'm still using because this is most accepted, and JNC 8 has revised it slightly a little higher for the normal people. But then anyway, 140/90 and 130/80 we take it. So white coat hypertension is also, remember, it is not without risk. White coat means whenever they see the doctor in the hospital, they will have white coat hypertension. They will have hypertension, and at home the blood pressure is normal. How do I overcome that? How do I do an ambulatory BP monitoring? Target organ damage is minimal in white coat hypertension. Uncompressible arteries in old age. This is called the osseous pseudo-hypertension. In old age, the arteries are very thicker and then almost calcified and fibrotic. And then whatever amount of pressure you give, you require to give a very large pressure to compress the arteries and to get a higher reading, which is called the pseudo-hypertension. Measurement issues, of course, about the cuff size. I told you BP recorded within 5 to 10 minutes after rest. Non-compliance with drug treatment is a very notorious phenomenon in hypertension. Majority of the hypertensives, they don't take treatment properly. What is the reason? One, it is an asymptomatic disease. 75% of the time, no symptoms. Number two, the patient does not feel the need to take the treatment. He thinks the hypertension is cured once he completes the course of one week or 10 days. And he says, doctor, I am now cured. I don't have giddiness. I don't have anything. So why should I take? That is the attitude of people. 40% of the people discontinue the treatment in the first year. No lifestyle modifications are practiced. They rarely reduce their salt or reduce their pickles, and they don't do exercise, and then only try to take drugs. We don't expect the diabetes and blood pressure to be controlled. Be cautious to a patient to label him as pseudo hypertension, because once you label him as pseudo hypertension, then he will not get the treatment. So what is this I'm looking at in the picture here is an ambulatory blood pressure monitor. You can see on the arm of this patient, the cuff is tied now. That is the blood pressure cuff, and then there's a little monitor there tucked to the belt there, and he goes about looking at doing various activities. You can see here, this is the systolic and this is the diastolic, and there is a 12 noon to 12 noon next day, and this is the sleeping phase. And normally what will happen is there is what is called the dipping of the systolic and diastolic during the sleep time. Nocturnal dipping is a feature of normal physiological feature of blood pressure. If the dipping doesn't occur, it indicates the vascular endothelial dysfunction and vascular integrity is damaged, and it is the earliest evidence of vascular damage. So if you do an ambulatory blood pressure, you know who are the people who are non-dippers. This is a dipper, is a person who normally dips the blood pressure of around 10 to 20 millimeters systolic and diastolic during 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. time, the sleeping time. So we have ambulatory blood pressure not only gives the diurnal variation and the circadian variation, it also tells you about the dipper, non-dipper phenomenon. And this distinguishes people with white coat hypertension and pseudo hypertension. And home BP monitoring and ABPM are the tools today to monitor these people. 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. And what is masked hypertension? There is another entity called masked hypertension. These people will have normal blood pressure in their clinic, but they will have higher blood pressure at home. Just the reverse of white coat hypertension. Why it occurs? And they usually come to see the doctor. They want to be good boys. They'll take medicines for a couple of days and then come and read the BP. Everything is fine. But again, they stop the medicines after going home because they feel there is no need. This is what is called the masked hypertension. They themselves are at risk by doing such behavior. And let us see further. Non-compliance of treatment. This is a very big issue in hypertension. One, it is asymptomatic. Two, the treatment is prolonged. And three, the patient feels that he is cured. So non-compliance is, a big issue. And what are the factors there? Hypertension in most patients is asymptomatic. Target organ damage and complications are not seen by the patient, they are occurred. Majority of the doctors, they only look at the arm blood pressure. They don't assess the target organ damage. If you do not look at the target organ damage, then naturally you are missing a very great important aspect of hypertension and its treatment. Side effects of the drugs might make them stop the drug. Cost of the drugs and painful different combinations of drugs. Multi-pharmacy or polypharmacy by them is one reason. They are taking medicines for diabetes, arthritis, cholesterol, ischemic heart disease, on top of the hypertension medicine also. Very difficult for them to manage so many medicines. Complexity of the regimens, you say, you take this in the morning, this in the night, this before food, this after food, this twice, this is once, and a lot of complicating problems. Timing and then the frequencies also may cause. Multiple medications, and for comorbidities, lack of understanding of the gravity of the disease. This is central because target organ damage has to be explained to the patient. For that, the physician inertia should not be there. Physician should look for the target organ damage. What are the target organs? The first target organ is the heart, where you expect left ventricular hypertrophy and left ventricular failure. And of course, there will be and this has to be brought out by echocardiography. How many of us are asking the patient to undergo echocardiography once we diagnose hypertension? Just reflect in your own heart. If you are not doing it, it is imperative that every hypertensive patient, a baseline echocardiogram is recorded. The second thing is the renal damage. Renal damage, don't wait till the creatinine becomes 4 or 5. What is the microalbuminuria like? Microalbuminuria is a single important predictor of renal and vascular health. And also, of course, the retinopathy, hypertensive cerebrovascular disease, hypertensive renovascular disease, and these things. False belief that hypertension got cured. There may be social, economic, and personal factors also. These are some of the important things. What are in our hand? This has to be underlined. That is the understanding the gravity of the disease by the physician and impressing on the patient, and also look for the target organ, make the regimen simpler and tailor it to the patient's pulse, and also the impress on the need that there's not getting cured, and you can only, control the hypertension and not cure it. Okay. Now, how to evaluate the non-compliers? Non-compliers can be evaluated, admit and administer. Admit the patient and administer. If the blood pressure is under control, then he is a non-complier. Or they stop and start the drugs. You say, you stop and I'm giving a new drug, and ask him to start a new drug, and in a different brand name or form. And if he gets control, that means the previous medication he has not taken. Now come to what is resistant hypertension. There is a very clear-cut definition of resistant hypertension. I'll try to go a little slower because the feedback was last time I was a little faster. From here onwards, I'll go a little slower. Now, first and foremost thing is the blood pressure is not on target. What is target blood pressure? 140/90 and 130/80. In the blood pressure with diabetics and CKD and other vascular diseases, 130/80, and in the normal population, 140/90 is the target. So target blood pressure is very important. We know that from studies that systolic hypertension uncontrolled is the cause of majority of the cerebrovascular events. So the first thing is BP blood pressure is not on target when after using 3 drugs. The patient is put on at least 3 different classes of drugs. In spite of it, the blood pressure is not under control. This is what is called blood pressure not under target, on target with 3 drugs. And one of them should have been a diuretic. This is also under the definition. So you should use at least 3 drugs. One of them is a diuretic. Patient is not on target. And at the optimal dosage, you are using the prescribed optimal doses. For example, Ramipril. If I want to use Ramipril, not 1.25, antihypertensive dose is anywhere between 5 and 10 milligrams. Enalapril I want to use 10 to 20 milligrams. Telmisartan I want to use 40 to 80 milligrams. So everything has got an optimal dose. And if you use a very mild dose, 10 milligrams of Telmisartan or 20 milligrams, it will not help. So whether he is the patient an optimal dosage. So the questions are, before I call a patient as resistant hypertension, first thing is he compliant for the lifestyle change? That means did he reduce the salt, use the diet I prescribed, do some exercise, stop smoking, and all that lifestyle change should have been ascertained and then assured. And then still the BP is not on target. I have put him on 3 drugs. One of them is the diuretic, and they are being used at optimal doses. Then it is resistant hypertension. Suppose it is not. I am using only 2 drugs. Add a 3rd drug, preferably a diuretic, and try to escalate the dosage of the drug for the optimal level and observe after some time. How much time? To start at the drugs today, not tomorrow. At least 2 to 3 weeks of time should be allowed for the hypertensive drugs to act and show a proper response on the target blood pressure. Now, who are the persons who can have resistant hypertension? Suppose in my practice, a patient is walking in. Can he be a candidate for resistant hypertension? I must be thinking in my mind. If one of these factors or more is rather present, then we are in for the chances of a resistant hypertension. The greater the age, of course, they can become resistant. High baseline blood pressure. Patients who have started on high baseline blood pressure. Patients who are obese and overweight. Patients who have excessive daily salt intake. Patients who are alcoholic. I know some people who take extra salt at the table. For every dish that is cooked, they add salt on the table and take it. Particularly the curd and buttermilk or whatever they take, they add extra salt and take. So whatever salt requirement for it is only 2 grams of sodium per day, and the salt that is available in the cooking is adequate for a daily intake. We don't have to require to take extra salt intake. Nobody eats salt with a spoon, but they will be taking salty foods like papads, pickles, and then seafoods and salt fish, and also the salted drinks, and of course the table salt added to the dishes. So this excessive dietary salt is one thing that one has to be very aware. Alcoholism also may make the patient prone for resistant hypertension. Is the patient a patient of chronic kidney disease, CKD, type 2 diabetes, left ventricular hypertrophy, black race, and female gender? We are not black race, we are brown race. Black means the negroid race, and the female gender are the ones more vulnerable for resistant hypertension. So what are my parameters? Advancing age, high baseline blood pressure, obesity, high salt intake, alcoholism, CKD, type 2 diabetes, LVH, black race, and female gender are some of the markers for resistant hypertension. They may not be the maker and marker. Marker means it could be a risk factor. Maker means a cause. They could be markers, and some of them might be even the makers of resistant hypertension. Medication interaction for blood pressure control. This is another area where blood pressure doesn't get controlled because of a simultaneous use of medication which will increase the blood pressure. There are certain medications which will increase the sympathomimetic activity in the body, and they will interfere with the antihypertensive drug treatment. The very notorious and very important one is non-narcotic analgesics, NSAIDs, aspirin. Okay, majority of the patients who are on aspirin are also hypertensive. They are given aspirin for the reason of coronary artery disease or ischemic heart disease. So you always try to keep the dose of aspirin to 75 milligrams or at best 100 milligrams. You don't have to use larger doses for antiplatelet effect. So you may have to use a little hypertensive dose in people who are on aspirin. NSAIDs are of course notorious to cause resistant hypertension. Selective COX-2 inhibitors like celecoxib, these are also known to cause sympathomimetic agents like decongestants used in the nasal decongestants and cough mixtures, diet pills, cocaine, ephedrine, stimulants like methylphenidate and amphetamine. These are used to stop sleep by the people who are working late in the night or whatever it is. Use of amphetamine, methylphenidate, alcohol, binge drinking of more than 30 ml per day, and oral contraceptive pills, steroids, anabolic steroids, decadurabolin, durabolin. These are given by the practitioners, and these could be the cause for resistant hypertension. Cyclosporine is one drug which is anti-tumor drug. Erythropoietin is given for increasing the RBC count in chronic renal failure, and that could itself be a stimulator for increased blood pressure. Licorice, herbal compounds like ephedra, these are some of the things which could interfere with blood pressure control. So we have seen two groups of slides. One, where the patient can be having a propensity for more resistant hypertension, like the markers of resistant hypertension. Now we have seen the conditions which may interfere with the BP control, like analgesics, then sympathomimetic agents, cocaine, ephedrine, methylphenidate, amphetamine, alcohol, OCP, steroids, anabolics, cyclosporine, erythropoietin, licorice, herbal compounds. Any one of these things are a combination of that. Now, is there a genetic propensity for resistant hypertension? Is it that some people genetically are more prone for resistant hypertension compared to others? Yes and no. Not very common. That's why it is no. Yes, because it can occur. For example, E, sodium, C, beta, and gamma, and Liddle's disease are genetic diseases which are associated with resistant hypertension. Cytochrome enzyme 3A5 also is associated with genetic hypertension. And more importantly, there is what is called the ACE genotype. The ACE is ACE enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme genotype. This is not the same across all the population or across the races. So the ACE expression, ACE gene expression is different in different types of people. In some people, the ACE expression is more. People who have more ACE expression, they are the ones who go in for resistant hypertension because the dose of ACE inhibition or ARB we use may not be adequate to suppress the high levels of ACE gene expression. So these are some of the genetic backgrounds of resistant hypertension. Now, whom we should watch for secondary hypertension? Secondary hypertension means there is an underlying cause. Suppose a person around 50 years, 60 years comes and he has got a blood pressure for over a period of time, it is unlikely to be a secondary hypertension. So, young hypertensives, 20-year-old fellow, 22-year-old fellow, 25-year-old girl, 18-year-old lady. So, these are the ones who could, generally, this is not essential hypertension, there will be a secondary cause. Or, somebody is throughout normal up to 60, 65 years, suddenly he starts becoming hypertensive at that age of 60 or 65. That is first time hypertension after 60 years. Then the third group of people, a patient is very well controlled with my drugs and is happy. Suddenly the BP is out of control. That means the last 3-4 months his BP is erratic and he always says, sir, I am taking treatment faithfully as given by you, I swear on Lord Muruga, but then the blood pressure is not controlled. Okay, that means what? Young hypertensives, first time hypertensives after 60 years, a well-controlled hypertension which is now out of control are the candidates who may be having secondary hypertension. Why I should know secondary hypertension? Secondary hypertension is mostly treatable. There is an underlying cause, either an endocrine or a vascular or a renal cause. And if I treat the cause, hypertension disappears. Unlike primary hypertension, where is the lifelong treatment? So I need to know about secondary hypertension. So patient-related problems, causes of resistant hypertension, physician-related problems. Patient-related problems, also already we have seen high Na intake, sodium intake. Some people by nature, they take more salt and they crave for salt. And we have to advise them hypertension is very much related to sodium. Here, a word of importance is potassium salts are beneficial. Sodium salts are harmful. Whatever we take as the salt or sodium chloride, the table salt is sodium salt. All fruits contain potassium salts. Potassium salts are not only salty but also sweet. The sweetness of the fruit is not only due to the carbohydrate but to the potassium content of the fruit. So try replace the sodium salt with the potassium salts of the fruit. There is one kind available in the market as low sodium. In patients who are not getting control, you can probably use for Lona salt. Lona means low sodium salt. That contains more of potassium salt. Poor adherence with the treatment plan, that is the compliance issue, and then intake of drugs that raise blood pressure. We have seen sympathomimetic amines, NSAIDs, and others, and lack of lifestyle adherence. That is more common than anything else because they don't adhere to walking and diet restrictions and salt restriction and fatty food and all that. And physician-related subclinical volume overload, inadequate use of the diuretics, progressive renal insufficiency, unsuspected secondary cause. So what I have to do? Progressive renal insufficiency means every blood pressure patient, at least once in a year, I should keep monitoring the renal function. And also, hypertension treatment today is not with a single drug. It has to be 2 drugs. Just like you use multiple drugs in tuberculosis, treatment of hypertension, unless in the very early, very young patient, an odd patient, at least 2 drugs should be used. One of them should be diuretic. One of them can be diuretic, the other will be ACE inhibitor or ARB, particularly if the patient is a diabetic. Or you can use a combination of ACE inhibitor, like all the prils are ACE inhibitors and all the sartans are the losartan, valsartan, telmisartan, candesartan, irbesartan. These are all the ARBs, that is the receptor blockers. And never use a combination of them. Ramipril, enalapril, perindopril, captopril, these are all the ACE inhibitors. So ACE inhibitor or ARB is the sheet anchor of the treatment, number one drug. The companion drug should be either a diuretic, a thiazide type of diuretic, not a loop diuretic, because we want to treat for a longer while, and probably hydrochlorothiazide or chlorthalidone. And the third drug that is available is the calcium channel blockers. And don't use nifedipine, use the amlodipine or selnidipine. So selnidipine and amlodipine are the good companion drugs. We have three important classes. One is the ACE inhibitor ARBs, second group is the CCBs, and the third group is the diuretic. At least you should be using two of those groups. And if we are using diuretic, increase the diuretic group. That could be one cause. An unsuspected secondary cause from the physician side, patient is not getting controlled, he is going on escalating the BP drugs and not thinking of a secondary cause, which could be dangerous for the patient, and we have to see. So, what are the strong associates of resistant hypertension? These four are strong associates of resistant hypertension. An uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled T2 diabetes, T2DM. We are going to have a lecture on type 2 diabetes following this lecture, and this is important to know. T2DM, uncontrolled diabetes of HbA1c more than 9, serum creatinine, CKD of serum creatinine more than 1.5, BMI of more than 30, which is associated with LVH also associated. These, another thing, obstructive sleep apnea syndrome, OSAS, obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. Every hypertensive patient, we should question for the daytime somnolence, lethargy, snoring in the night. And if you ask him, he'll say, no, I won't snore. You have to ask his wife or his friend who is sleeping along with him. So every patient of hypertension must be assessed for clinically at least for obstructive sleep apnea, those who are short stature and then short neck, those who have snoring history, daytime somnolence, they must be evaluated for obstructive sleep apnea using what is called the PSG, polysomnogram. Polysomnogram, the summary index is called the apnea-hypopnea index. That means during the period of sleep, all of us will have 1 or 2 or 3 hypoxic or apneic spells in the night. That is normal. And immediately the respiration picks up. In people with OSAS, such spells will be more than 20 per hour. Apnea-hypopnea index of more than 20 is indicative of OSAS. Sometime later, we will have a CME on OSAS because that nowadays it is very common and every practitioner must know when to suspect OSAS because a wonderful treatment is available for OSAS nowadays and we should not leave it undiagnosed. So remember that uncontrolled diabetes, CKD, left ventricular hypertrophy, obesity, OSAS are strong associates of resistant hypertension. Between the two, diastolic blood pressure is difficult to control. Systolic blood pressure is difficult to control. Diastolic blood pressure will come down in old age. As age advances, the natural phenomena is there will be what is called a wide pulse pressure. The difference between these two is the pulse pressure, and a diastolic will be usually 70, 80 like that. There's no problem with diastolic blood pressure. In fact, some people will have even 60 diastolic blood pressure, but the systolic is not getting controlled. Systolic blood pressure 160, 170. Never allow the patient to go beyond 140, 150 because studies have shown the higher the systolic blood pressure, the greater is the stroke risk. And one important direct cause of stroke is hypertension and a preventable condition by treating hypertension aggressively. And the saying of age plus blood pressure, all the stories have gone. Supposing I am 65 years, let us say, and my blood pressure is 100 plus 65, that is, 65 plus 100, 165 you can have. That is not like that. No upper limit, no rule like that. Everybody who is having more than 140 or 150 systolic is a systolic hypertension. If the diastolic is normal, then it becomes isolated systolic hypertension. Isolated systolic hypertension is the common cause of stroke. So, problems of resistant hypertension, there is a difficulty in controlling the systolic blood pressure. How do I do that? By using a diuretic. Usually systolic blood pressure comes down. The amlodipine group of drugs reduces systolic blood pressure. And in addition to that, you can use indapamide. Indapamide is available as Natrelix. Natrelix CSR. Indapamide is another drug which comes handy for isolated systolic hypertension. Common drugs are amlodipine, a diuretic, thalidomide, chlorothalidone like diuretic, or an indapamide drug can bring down the systolic hypertension over and above the ACE inhibitor and ARBs or whatever background treatment you are using. Now, what is the proportion of secondary and resistant hypertension? If I have 100 people with hypertension, 30% of them will be resistant hypertension. 70% of them only are under control. For those people who are under control, 70% are controlled and 30% are not controlled or resistant hypertension. Among them, 5% have a secondary cause that is called secondary hypertension. This is from the practitioner's point of view. Now, how do what are the secondary causes? Secondary hypertension, what are the common causes of secondary hypertension? We just now saw that 5% are secondary, and we also know that secondary hypertension is treatable. In the sense, if you treat the secondary cause, the hypertension disappears. What are the secondary causes? Primary hyperaldosteronism. Excess mineralocorticoid activity from the adrenal cortex. Excess glucocorticoid activity from the adrenal cortex is Cushing's syndrome. Excess sympathetic hormones like adrenaline and noradrenaline from the adrenal medulla is pheochromocytoma. So, there are 3 endocrine conditions, common endocrine conditions, which are associated with secondary hypertension, and that could be also resistant to treatment unless you treat the secondary cause. What are they? Zona glomerulosa and zona fasciculata and zona reticularis. Reticularis produces the sex steroids. Glomerulosa and fasciculata, they produce the mineralocorticoid and the glucocorticoids. Excess mineralocorticoid is aldosteronism. Excess glucocorticoids is the Cushing's syndrome. From the medulla, excess sympathetic hormone from pheochromocytoma, either an adenoma or a hyperplasia or a malignancy, whatever may be the cause of the excess pheochromocytoma there. And then you have renal arterial sclerosis, RAS, renal disease, parenchymal and vascular. In the kidney, there are 2 types of diseases that are possible. One is which can cause hypertension. One is the renal parenchymal disease, renoparenchymal disease. The other is the renovascular disease. The blood vessels of the kidney are at fault, or the kidney parenchyma is at fault. For example, patient has got polycystic kidney, he will have hypertension, renoparenchymal disease. He has pyelonephritis, he can have hypertension. He has got CKD, parenchymal disease, hypertension. Like that, there are many renoparenchymal diseases. In addition, you have got renovascular diseases like renal artery stenosis, renal artery atherosclerotic occlusion of renal artery. These are some of the renal. We will come and see the subsequent slides, the details. So, general population, the resistant hypertension is rather low. In a specialized clinic, it is 15%. In a clinical trial, it is 30%. The previous slide I showed you is around in the clinical trial or the specialized clinic ratio. Whereas if you have a practice here, in your practice, if you see 100 people, hardly 5% of them are having resistant hypertension. But it is important to pick up those things. Now, primary or essential hypertension 93 to 95%, secondary causes 5 to 7%, renal hypertension is 3 to 5, renoparenchymal 2 to 3%, renovascular 1 to 2%, endocrine like Cushing's and the pheochromocytoma and the aldosteronism or Conn's disease are 0.3 to 1%, oral contraceptives 0.5%, miscellaneous conditions are 0.5%. These are the relative prevalence of secondary hypertension. Needless to say, primary hypertension is the bread and butter of treatment of hypertension, and you have to control everybody to the target blood pressure. Some people will have secondary causes, and these are the secondary causes, 5% of them, and these could throw a challenge as a resistant hypertension. So what is the mechanism actually? Why secondary hypertension develops in these people? Because of the increased vascular tone, increased sodium and water retention, abnormal SNS, that is sympathetic nervous system activation, abnormal renin-angiotensin system activation, or endothelial nitric oxide mismatch. That means endothelial dysfunction, nitric oxide is not produced properly, nitric oxide levels are low, and reactive oxygen species are higher. That is the NO mismatch. So, increased vascular tone due to sympathetic hormones. There is an increased retention of fluid and water and sodium because of the mineralocorticoids or glucocorticoids, sympathetic nervous system activation, ROS activation, either primary or secondary cause, or there is an endothelial dysfunction with a mismatch of the endothelial function between nitric oxide, which is protective, and the reactive oxygen species, which are harmful. These are the pathogenic mechanisms. Now, going to the renovascular and renoparenchymal, just suffice that you know the names because you are not a specialist in renovascular hypertension and renal parenchymal. Commonest thing is renal artery stenosis, atherosclerotic renal artery stenosis, fibromuscular dysplasia, arteritis, dissection, thrombosis, Takayasu. These are some of the blood vessel diseases in general. They may affect the kidney also, kidney blood vessels also. Commonest among them is the renal artery stenosis. Chronic kidney disease, CKD, it could be due to unilateral by reflex or tumor, bilateral chronic kidney disease like chronic glomerulonephritis, chronic pyelonephritis, polycystic kidney, or renal cyst, or there could be a renin secreting tumors from the kidney, and hypertension may be the cause or maybe the effect. In the renal disease, renal parenchymal disease, hypertension may be the cause of the renal parenchymal disease causing the hypertension, or the hypertension is causing renal parenchymal disease, which is the effect. It could be cause as well as the effect. Now, fibromuscular dysplasia and atherosclerotic RAS are two important conditions of the renovascular. I told you, are atherosclerotic and fibromuscular. And between them, how do I distinguish? Fibromuscular dysplasia, mainly the tunica media is affected. Here the intima is atherosclerotic. It's mainly in the young. This is mainly in the smokers and elderly, and abdominal bruit will be heard. This is mainly in the females. This is a severe recent hypertension and CKD together. There is a good response to angioplasty in fibromuscular dysplasia, and these people can have flash pulmonary edema and then increase in the cholesterol also. Takayasu syndrome is a part of fibromuscular dysplasia, and the secondary intimal atherosclerosis may worsen with ACE inhibitors and also with other CV diseases. So one has to be very careful while using the ACE inhibitor CARBs. If the renal function is not good, that means if the creatinine in men is more than 0.3 and 2.5 in women, then we should not use ACE inhibitors for general practitioners. Whereas when a nephrologist, he will use up to 6 milligrams of creatinine. But for us, we have to use, keep looking at the creatinine. For females, 2.5, males, 3 milligrams of creatinine is the cutoff point where we should not continue to use angiotensin converting enzyme, Prills or the sartans there. Then the other thing is potassium. In these drugs, ACEs and ARBs, they increase the potassium. So if the potassium is high, I am not supposed to use. or if the renal failure is worsening, I am not supposed to use them. So this is about a word about the use of ACE inhibitors. The other absolute contraindications for ACE are bilateral renal artery stenosis and pregnancy. Pregnancy is an absolute contraindication for ACE and ARPs, whereas renal artery stenosis bilateral is also an absolute contraindication. One-side stenosis is a relative contraindication. High potassium, high creatinine are relative contraindications. Now, renal artery stenosis and renal hypertension, this is atherosclerotic, fibromuscular media hyperplasia, and you do a duplex ultrasonogram, MR angiogram, and other tests a little beyond the scope of the practitioners, and you see how it happens. This is fibromuscular dysplasia. You can see that the coiled artery of the renal artery here directly arising from the aorta, and you do an angiogram, you see that there is a fibromuscular coiling and then hyperplasia, which is causing luminal narrowing of that. Then what I do, we do a sort of angioplasty and treat with the balloon angioplasty and open the vessel. Fibromuscular dysplasia is best managed by renal angiography, renal arterial angiography, and then angioplasty. Now, atherosclerotic cross also can be treated. This is an atherosclerotic cross, whereas what you have seen here is a fibromuscular dysplasia in the young, in the females, and all that. This is an atherosclerotic cross is because of the atherosclerotic narrowing, just like the coronary narrowing, renal narrowing can occur. And then this also is amenable for treatment and stenting. Just as we stent the coronary blood vessels, we do the renal angiogram and then open up the vessel and stent it there. And then this is a permanent remedy for the hypertension. Now, renal parenchymal disease causing hypertension, CKD is one of the common cause as well as the effect of hypertension. Serum creatinine more than 1.5 can cause changes of resistant hypertension and renal hypertension. Increased sodium and fluid retention, expansion of the intravascular volume and fluid overload. CKD is a strong predictor of poor outcomes and renal hypertension, resistant hypertension. Now, what is the message here? So every patient of hypertension must undergo evaluation for target organ damage. What are the evaluations? Number one, look at the echocardiography. Number two, look at the carotid Doppler. Number three, look at the renal function by microalbuminuria and ultrasound scan and urine examination, and if necessary, renal arteriogram. And also look for the culprit hormones like cortisol, mineralocorticoids, and then noradrenaline and then adrenaline, which cannot be directly measured because they are pulsatile and you use only the metabolites of those catecholamines. So catecholamine metabolites in the urine, like, normetanephrine and metanephrine examination are some of the screening things that you do. Now, glucocorticoid, mineralocorticoid, secondary hypertension. Now the adrenal causes are there. We have come out from the renal causes. From the adrenal, we have hyperaldosteronism, glucocorticoid excess, and also the pheochromocytoma. A little beyond the practitioners. Only thing is you keep measuring the 11-beta hydroxylase deficiency and then the urine vanillin mandelic acid or urine normetanephrine and metanephrine and ACTH measurements are some of the important things that you keep in mind. Now, primary hyperaldosteronism, I'm skipping that, and Cushing syndrome also I'm skipping. Now, pheochromocytoma is important here in the sense it is episodic hypertension. That means patient will have hypertension on one day, normotension on the other day, very swinging blood pressure. Episodic hypertension, prevalence is rather low, BP variability is very high, CV risk factor itself, BP variability is a CV risk factor, palpitation, headache, and sweating. Any patient complaining of palpitation, headache, sweating, episodic hypertension, first we have to exclude pheochromocytoma. What do? I just look for urinary metabolites of normetanephrine and metanephrine and ask for CT scan of the kidney region, including the adrenals. Dysglycemia and abnormal GTT is also a feature of pheochromocytoma, has a diagnostic specificity of 90%. That means if you find GTT abnormal associated episodic hypertension, palpitation, headache, and sweating, more or less you are looking for pheochromocytoma. Plasma-free metanephrine and normetanephrine are the sensitivity, very high sensitive and specific test for pheochromocytoma. Now, among the various corticosteroid-induced or corticoid-induced hypertensions, I can separate them by looking at these three: serum potassium, plasma renin, and aldosterone. Depending on the values, I can say whether it is primary hyperaldosteronism or glucocorticoid remediable hypertension or mineralocorticoid or deoxycorticosterone. Because these are, you can see here the serum potassium, plasma renin, and aldosterone. We'll separate these types of patients into different categories. Other causes of secondary hypertension, biological causes like coarctational aorta, polyarteritis nodosa, aortitis, and then obstructive sleep apnea, as I already told you, Liddle syndrome, a genetic defect, is ENAC receptor abnormality, acromegaly, metabolic syndrome, polycystic ovarian disease, increase or decrease of the thyroid hormones, hyperparathyroidism. These are some of the other unimportant causes of secondary hypertension. Exogenous glucocorticoid, somebody is on steroid, for some reason somebody is using Licorise, excess alcohol, binge drinking, NSAIDs, cyclosporins, and OCP. So, physical examination, blood pressure measurement, waist and weight, peripheral pulses, thyroid, cardiovascular system examination, abdominal masses, looking for bruit, aortic pulsations, fundus examination for retinopathy. These are routine things. Every BP patient, BP measurement, waist and weight measurement for metabolic syndrome, BMI, all peripheral pulses, look for bruits, look for thyroid hyperfunction, heart examination, also look for abdominal masses and bruit and retinopathy changes. Evaluation of resistant hypertension, blood pressure recording technique, cuff size has to be proper, strict compliance with the treatment, evaluation of the secondary causes which we have listed, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring to exclude the white coat, assessment of the target organ damage, particularly kidney disease with microalbuminuria, serum creatinine and ultrasound, retinopathy, and then LVH by echocardiography are essential. History of other drug intake will also tell daytime somnolence and loud snoring, apneic spells, suspect obstructive sleep apnea. Rarely you will be asked to evaluate further, like doing an angiography and then DSA, that is another type of angiography, and then MRI, CT, USG, color Doppler, nuclear medicine. So how do I go about treating them? Salt restriction, losing weight, physical activity, smoking cessation, alcohol abstinence, glycemia and lipidemia control. A, B, C. A is the control of the A1C. B is the blood pressure. C is the cholesterol. Control A1C, control blood pressure, control. This is a comprehensive work, not treating only diabetes or hypertension, but comprehensively treat the patient. Bring the weight loss, salt restriction, physical activity, smoking, abstinence are some of the lifestyle principles. Drug treatment, if a correctable cause is found, like a secondary hypertension, treat the cause. Aggressive drug therapy, optimizing the current treatment. Suppose he is on 5 milligrams of ramipril, step it up to 7.5 or 10 or 12.5. If he is on 40 milligrams of telmisartan, step it up to 80 milligrams of telmisartan. Like that, optimizing the drug treatment. Effective diuresis. Either you can use furosemide and torsemide for a short run and then shift on to chlorthalidone or chlorthiazide. MRA antagonists are available. These are very handy in resistant hypertension, particularly the eplerenone and the spironolactone antagonists like your aldactone, triamterene and amiloride dietide, these are some of the drugs which are handy. Hydralazine or minoxidil can be handy in treating resistant hypertension. Beta blockers have a role. Normally, beta blockers per se have no role in treatment of simple hypertension. Simple hypertension, unless there is an indication for beta blocker, we don't use beta blocker as a primary treatment of hypertension. There are only 3 classes. One is the ACE inhibitor ARBs, the other one is the CCBs, amlodipine, cilnidipine. The third one is the diuretic. Beta blockers are not the choice. But in resistant hypertension, you can think of a beta blocker and a diuretic, or hydralazine and minoxidil. And transdermal patches of clonidine. Clonidine is available as Ercamin. Transdermal patches of clonidine also will work. This is the drug treatment of resistant hypertension. Consider plasma renin measurement, adding doxazosin, that is the alpha blocker, adding spironolactone, that is the aldactone, eplerenone, which is the mineralocorticoid antagonist. Some of the practical points for secondary hypertension, resistant hypertension and secondary hypertension. What are the drug interactions which I should avoid? Hydrochlorothiazide interacts with cholestyramine, propranolol with rifamycin, gonitidine with tricyclics, ACE inhibitors with indomethacin, diuretics with indomethacin. All of the cocaine and tricyclics, all antihypertensive drugs. Most of the BP drugs are affected by phenylpropanolamine, which is a constituent of most of your cough preparations and then the decongestant preparations. So when you use cholestyramine, rifamycin, tricyclics, indomethacin, and then the cocaine and phenylpropanolamine, be aware that there could be drug-to-drug interaction. Now, future options for resistant hypertension. Direct renin inhibitors already available. Aliskiren, neutral endopeptidase inhibitors called the omeprazole, and then aldosterone antagonist eplerenone is available. Aldosterone synthetase inhibitors, clonidine extended release, endothelin antagonists like darusentan, novel combination algorithms. These are all available now, and we can, in only cases where they are not responding to the treatments we have already discussed, these could be handy. But I suggest if you find a patient of resistant hypertension, think of secondary hypertension and refer him to a specialist so that they will be able to find out what is the cause of resistant hypertension and send you back for better control. If it is primary hypertension, you please treat. If it is resistant hypertension, you diagnose it and you understand that there is a lot of workup is required. We need to refer them and get the advice from a physician, senior consultant physician or a cardiac physician. Now, non-pharmacological approaches. Following procedures are invasive and irreversible. Implanting implantable pulse generators, perivascular carotid sinus leads to surgically implanted. Renal denervation, particularly in those with renal origin of the disease, has promising results. Neurovascular decompensation may have a temporary effect.